In this video, I'll be teaching you how to do interior lighting based on some reference images, and afterward we'll do some post-production together. Hello everyone, it's Hadi and welcome to HM Studio. This video is the third part of a series. We started with modeling this scene, then we made some materials in the second video, and this one will be the last one where we wrap up everything. So without any further ado, let's start. As we did in the previous video, I gathered all the reference images in the PureRef, and in this video we're gonna mostly focus on these two pictures and we'll try to recreate the same mood and feeling. As you can see in this picture, the light sources are only the sunlight and the skylight, or the environment light. So instantly we know that we need to use Vray Sun and Vray Sky for the lighting. Alright. As for the first step, let's go through the render settings, either by clicking on this button over here or pressing the F10 key on your keyboard. For this one we're using the Vray 6, which just came out, but we're not going to use any of the new features, so don't worry if you're using an older version. Now let's go to the Vray tab, change the image sampler type to bucket, 24 for the min shading rate, 10 for max subdivs, and 0.03 for the noise threshold, so it renders a bit faster. For color mapping, let's go with the default Reinhardt, and in the GI tab we're going with the default settings as well. Let's just add some elements to the element tab because they will come in handy as we go. I'm gonna go with the denoiser, light mix, Cryptomatte, and wire color. Now let's hit OK and we can start. Okay, as you can see, the sunlight direction is kinda like this. So we already have an idea about where to put the Vray Sun. So let's select the lights layer and create our Vray Sun either from the Vray toolbar or from the create menu, lights, Vray, and Vray Sun. Now let's click, drag, and release. Okay, now Vray is asking us if we want to use a Vray Sky as our environment light, and the answer is yes. Now we can start the IPR rendering to see the result as we go. Okay, we should move the sun upper on the z-axis and roughly find the same position as the reference image. We're looking for this kind of light direction, so it needs to go to the right a bit, I guess. Maybe a bit more. Okay, the direction is good, but the height is not matching at the moment. We should move the sun upper a little bit more. Okay, it looks alright. Since we don't have this sofa in this shot, I would rather hide it as well. So let's select it, right click, and select hide selection like so. Okay, although we have the right light direction, the room is still looking way darker than the reference image. And to make it brighter, we should increase the environment's light intensity. So let's go ahead and select the light mix from here and increase the environment light until we get more or less the same result. Now to get rid of this burned out effect that is happening over here, we can add an exposure layer adjustment. So let's add one from here. And decrease the highlight burn value all the way down like this. Okay, great. Now we should stop the render, and in the light mix layer, we should bake all of these adjustments into the scene. And we can do that by clicking on this button over here. What does this button do? If I open up the material editor and also the environment light settings from the rendering menu, and drag and drop the Vray sky into the material editor, you can see that it has all of its default settings. But after I click on this button, what happens is, alright, let me just drag and drop it again. Okay, now you can see that our Vray sky has been hooked into a Vray comp texture as the first layer, and we have a Vray color as our second layer with the multiply mode. Since we haven't changed the color, so this color here is also white. But because we've changed the intensity, the RGB multiplier is 12 now, which actually is 1 by default. So this map will multiply the environment light's intensity by 12 0.9, and that's why we're getting a stronger environment light in our render the next time we run it. Alright, here we have it. But it is still way darker than the reference, so let's increase it a bit more. Now you can see here that the difference between where we have the sunlight and the shadows are roughly matching with the reference image, and that's really good. So let's bake these changes into the scene and see if we still get the same result after rendering, because after doing that, the result is not going to be exactly the same as what we have right now. Okay, you see, it's still dark. At this stage, what we can do is to increase the exposure of the whole image by selecting the exposure layer and increasing the exposure value like this. Now let's increase the environment light a bit more, and I would say it looks pretty much similar to the reference image in terms of the light setup, but maybe we could decrease the sun's intensity for just a little bit, just to make it look more similar to the reference image. Okay, that looks really good. I think you've noticed that the colors are not quite there yet. We'll adjust them as much as we can in the frame buffer, and we'll push them a bit more in Photoshop. For instance, we can make this black color a bit brighter, so we could have some more information over here for when we're going to add some contrast to the image. So let's open up the material editor and pick its material with this eyedropper over here, and now we can increase the diffuse value up to 9. Yeah, that's good enough. Okay, it's time for me to tell you what the Cryptomatte element does. If you can remember, we've added that to our elements before we start the lighting process, and you can find it here as well. It's kind of like the Vray color element, but does a totally different thing. For instance, let's take a look at the floor material. As you can see, its color is different than the reference image. To adjust the color, brightness, contrast, or whatever of any element in the frame buffer, we can use a Cryptomatte mask. So let's add a color balance layer from here, and we want this adjustment layer to only affect the floor objects, and for that we can mask the floor by adding a Cryptomatte mask by clicking here and selecting Cryptomatte mask. Now with this pick button, we can add as many elements as necessary to this mask just by clicking on those objects in the frame buffer. So let's go ahead and select them from here. Okay, it seems that we can only see one of them, and I selected this chair by mistake. Now to remove this chair from the mask, I can simply click on this button and select the chair, and it will be removed from the list. Now let's select the Properties tab, and since we want this adjustment layer to affect only the colors, we should change the blending mode to color, like this. Now let's adjust these colors to get as close as possible to the reference image. It looks a bit brighter on the reference image, and we can do that with the curve adjustment and a Cryptomatte mask as we did before. Now let's select the Properties tab and make the darker areas brighter with this handle over here. The higher you push it, it will make the area brighter, and the lower you go, it makes it darker. Okay, it looks a lot better now. We can do the same thing for the curtains as well. So let's add a color balance, then mask it with a Cryptomatte mask, and just adjust the colors to get a bit closer to the reference image. Alright, we can do all of these color adjustments here, but I would prefer to teach you how to do it properly in Photoshop a bit later in this video. For the next step, we can give the image a bit of contrast, and we can do it with the filmic tone map adjustment layer. So let's go ahead and add one from here. Now let's change the type to power curve and start adjusting this curve with these controllers over here. Alright, it looks good, but let's make the image a bit brighter with the exposure layer. Just a tiny bit. I guess we can adjust the color of the floor a bit more also. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, let's reduce the opacity of this color balance layer a little bit. Okay, that looks good. I think everything that we've done so far is good enough, and I would prefer to render this shot and do the rest of the job in Photoshop. The same thing goes with the other cameras as well, and since the process is pretty much the same, it would be your practice to do that after finishing this video. Alright, one thing that I should mention before we start rendering this image as final is that we have to make just a couple of adjustments to our render settings. Of course, we need to increase the size of the render to get a higher resolution, and we also have to decrease the noise threshold in the image sampler settings. So we've used 0.03 for the testing phase, and we can use 0.01 for the final render, and since we also have the denoiser, it's not recommended to go lower unless you know what you're doing, you know. And I should probably make another video about the render settings, and if you think I should, just let me know in the comment section. Okay, I think we're done here. I'm gonna render this shot and we'll come back to you after it's done. Alright, as you can see, the render has finished, and the first thing we gotta do is to save all the elements separately. And we can do it from the file menu and selecting the save all image channels to separate files. Then you have to give it a name, select your format, and save. That's all. Okay, now let's select the effect result and drop it into Photoshop. Now we can follow this reference and adjust the colors, contrast, brightness, and almost everything. First of all, let's work on the floor a little bit. In the frame buffer, we had to use the Cryptomatte to mask out the areas that we need. But here we can use the wire color. So let's go ahead and drop it into this image by simply dragging and dropping it to the Photoshop. Now with the magic wand tool, we can select any of these colors that we need. And in this case, we're gonna have to select this one, which represents the floor. But we also have the same color in the ceiling, and we have to remove those selected areas with the marquee tool by either selecting subtract from here or holding the Alt key on your keyboard and removing these selected areas like this. Now we have to create a group on top of the first layer and mask the floor area by clicking on this button. Now whatever we do in this group will only affect the floor area. Okay, let's go ahead and add a color balance adjustment layer and just try to match these two colors from here. Okay, now let's add a level adjustment layer and give it a bit of contrast. And we can desaturate the red colors with a hue saturation adjustment layer like this. I guess they're close enough, but you can still put some more time into it and do it more precisely. Okay, let's work on the dining furniture. Once again, let's turn on the wire color layer, then select the furniture, only the wooden parts I mean. Create another group and mask it with this button. Now let's work on the colors with a color balance adjustment layer. Maybe we could make it a bit darker also. Okay, now the ceiling. You can see that it has this reddish tonality to it and we gotta get rid of it. Let's go ahead and select the areas with the magic wand tool. Now to add to your selection area, you can either enable the add to selection button over here, or you can hold the shift key on your keyboard. Once again, with the marquee tool, we can remove the extra selected areas. Now let's create another group, mask it, and remove that red tonality with a color balance adjustment layer by adding some cyan color to the midtones. I think that's good enough. We also need to get rid of this red colors in the curtains with the same method, so let's go ahead and do that. Okay, add another group, mask it, and this time we can go with the hue saturation and just remove the red color from the selected areas. Okay, they look pretty much the same, but I think I should still do a little bit of more adjustments. Okay, pretty close. Now we can fix these lamps, and again we should get rid of the red colors, so let's go ahead and do the same things for this one as well. Alright, that looks pretty good. Now that we're close enough, we can do our final touch and push it towards our liking. I tend to use a camera raw filter after I'm done with all the other adjustments. To do that, you should create a collapse layer of all the layers that you already have by creating an empty layer on top of all the other layers, and pressing Ctrl, Alt, Shift and E keys all together. Okay, now we have all of these layers in one layer, and we should convert it to a smart object before applying the final filter. Now let's select the camera raw filter from the filter menu, and here you would have all kind of adjustments in one filter. Let's give it a bit of clarity, which is my favorite, to be honest. You can adjust also the temperature from here. And basically whatever you do from now on, it's about your personal preference. Let me just reduce the highlights. Maybe darker the shadows. I would make the blacks a bit brighter. And in general, I'd prefer to reduce the saturation of the orange and yellow colors, and I can do it from here. At the end, I would give it a little bit of vignette effect, and that's all. Alright, now that our image has got darker, I would make it a little bit brighter by adding a level adjustment layer and pushing the midtones towards the left. As you can see, we have less saturation compared to the reference image here, and that's only because I like it more this way. But you can totally ignore the part that I reduced the saturation in the camera raw filter. I will share with you this Photoshop file alongside with two others on my Patreon page, and you can download them from there. Okay guys, I hope that you liked this series and found it useful, and if you did, a like on this video would be much appreciated. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, so you don't miss my future tutorials. Have a great one, and I'll catch you in the next one.